There's more to it. I mean, when you design a residence, you're designing for an individual or a family, right? And it's for that specific end user. But when you do these big venues, I mean, I primarily do sports arenas now, like all the premium spaces. It's like thousands of people who will use a space, right? Hundreds of people, depending what type of space it is. So really, it's being strategic in the early stages of what are those key feature moments that you want to establish in a space. Like, what are those wow factors that you want people to take a look at it?
Hey everybody, I'm Julie and welcome to Women with Cool Jobs. Hello everybody, this is Julie Berman and welcome to another episode of Women with Cool Jobs. So this podcast has been so much fun for me because in looking back, there are probably a lot of things that I had questions about because I just genuinely want to know. But I also think that it's like this idea of finding treasure. And today's guest felt like that because I think about in just sort of the way that we think about careers and industries. There's a lot of people who we think about who we've maybe figured out that like their job exists because we've interacted with someone in that job. So like a firefighter or a doctor or a policeman or policewoman or a teacher. A lot of those people we see in our community and we interact with them on a regular basis, or we see them around and we see evidence of their work. There's a lot of other jobs, like so many other jobs that I think also we hear about and we just know that it exists. And it's this general idea in our head of like what it looks like in this particular industry. And then I love this idea of the treasure hunt and of finding what I call a lane within an industry or within a career. And it's usually something that like it's an avenue that is within a larger industry that I just never thought about that as a possibility. And so today's guest is an exact example of this, Edith Ponciano. And she is a hospitality interior designer. And so what that means is she is an interior designer, but she creates the designs for much larger spaces, like usually spaces that you'd think of in more commercial settings. So whether that's hotels, whether that's restaurants, whether that's sporting arenas or big stadiums, this is her cool job. And she started out being at a very large company, and then she now has her own small boutique agency where she helps just a select number of people with their projects. And she's actually working now in the more sports oriented space of doing arenas. And so we talk in this interview about her cool job, about how she got into it, and the fact that she just really was always interested in design. And one thing we hit on, which I think was so true for me and might be also true for you, is this idea of interior design for residential spaces. So we've heard about HGTV, we've seen the shows, whether it's, two cute brothers who are twins on HGTV. I love that show and used to watch it all the time. Or whether it's the Gaines and like Joanna Gaines and her doing her gorgeous work. That's usually the residential side. Even magazines oftentimes is the residential side. I had never seen an example of someone doing it on the commercial side, which is why I think this is such a cool thing to discover. Like it feels like when I meet people who have these lanes within broader industries that I'm aware of, but that I didn't know their specific job existed because I just never thought about it. It feels like finding a treasure in my treasure hunt. So I hope you will enjoy this episode with Edith. We talk about the nuance of her jobs, what it's like having her own company, and who she works with, what types of things she thinks about, and some of the cool projects that she's worked on, which includes right now she's literally helping to build the Nissan Stadium for the Tennessee Titans in Nashville, Tennessee. That is supposed to be done, I guess, in early 2027. And she said she's been working on this project for years. So definitely, I know you're going to enjoy learning about her and what she does. I also want to remind you, if you are here in the Phoenix, Arizona area, make sure you also check out April 25th event for Women with Cool Jobs Live. This is going to be an amazing, super fun, very special space to connect with other women, to feel like we can do anything and everything because that's what we're doing. It's basically just all about women's empowerment and also getting some tools for yourself to step into the woman that you want to become. So it's a little bit podcast interview, it's a little bit personal development, it's a little bit connection and networking. And also, there's opportunity for you to share about your own cool job in what I call Cool Jobs Candids, which is a 1 to 2 minute spotlight where you get to practice sharing your own story. And I did this really intentionally because I want more women to start sharing their story, to start talking about themselves in a really beautiful, positive, empowering way. And this is the space to do it in. So I hope if you are here in the Phoenix area or if you know someone who is, that you will go check out this event. Again, it is April 25th. It's a Saturday, and I would love for you to be there. So thank you for being here and enjoy this episode with me and Edith. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So today I am so excited to have Edith Ponciano here. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Awesome, me too. So you have such a cool job, and I'm really excited to dive into like what does it mean and what is it that you do. So you are a hospitality interior designer and the founder of EP Atelier, and you transform hospitality spaces, so things like boutique hotels, upscale restaurants, innovative sports arenas, stadiums, and you have your own business doing this, which is really, really cool. And when I first saw that, like you and your job existed, I had never actually thought about the bigger spaces that sometimes we go into. I think I've thought of residential, and some smaller spaces. But this was such a cool idea to think about, the idea of like designing some of these spaces where we all go in, and we do things as a community, or we do things for fun. And so I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you for being here, Edith.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited. I do think it's kind of an underrated interior design industry. I think, like you said, a lot of people kind of assume residential, so it's great to expose it more and more.
Yeah. And so I would love to first talk about like how do you define your cool job? How would you share it if someone asked you, what do you do?
Yeah. So, I always tell people like I'm a hospitality designer, and really what that means is really we're helping shape create experiences for people in these large scale venues, like you mentioned. So, like if you imagine a hotel or a stadium, I mean, you walk inside and you're walking inside the lobby, maybe you go inside the club spaces, or it's a restaurant or the guest room. So we're really shaping those experiences that people have, and there's so much that goes into it, from designing it architecturally, of like shaping the space initially, and then how do you want to light it, what materials you want to use, the furnishings. So it's very of a layered process. So that's kind of a quick summary of how I would approach that conversation.
I love that. And one of the things that really I thought was so fascinating, I was, kind of like learning more about you on, all the places like your website and LinkedIn. And then one of the things that I love that you said that I thought was so, I don't think I guess I would have put it together with interior design, but you talked about, this was actually in reference to your course that you built to help other people learn about what you do and like how to do it. But you talked about how creating spaces that tell stories, evoke emotions, and bring people together. And I just thought, especially the idea of like telling stories and evoking emotions is so interesting. Like it makes sense that you pointed it out, but it isn't something that I guess I would have like landed on my own. So can you go into that? Like what do you mean by that? And like how do you do that as an interior designer? Because it's so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people have this misconception that we're just designing spaces to make it look beautiful, which we are, in fact, but I think, there's more to it. I mean, when you design a residence, you're designing for an individual or a family, right? And it's for that specific end user. But when you do these big venues, I mean, I primarily do sports arenas now, like all the premium spaces. It's like thousands of people who will use a space, right? Hundreds of people, depending what type of space it is. So really, it's being strategic in the early stages of what are those key feature moments that you want to establish in a space? Like what are those wow factors that you want people to take a look at? And like I said, lighting is another huge factor in that to create like different moods in a space versus like, do you want it to be bright and airy to kind of showcase like the brand of a team, or is it going to be something that's more of a speakeasy and it's going to be darker and moodier? So it's really depends on um, the vibe you're going for and the audience as well.
I love that. And that's so fascinating that I mean, like when you think about it, that you're designing for like hundreds of people possibly in one space. What are the differences in like how you, I guess, approach it or how you think about it? I'm guessing the materials are different because I can imagine, people sitting on seats over and over and over again would get a lot more use than like, at home.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
what
And
are like some of those things, I guess, that that would be different, especially for people listening and they've really never thought about this idea of doing it in a commercial space.
yeah, I mean, I think you pointed it out. Definitely the finishes is crucial. We definitely
Okay.
have a huge like library of different resources, but everything is commercial grade. So, I mean, it looks just as good as like say natural stone, right, for countertops, but it's like a industry built, porcelain tile that, gets used instead, and that's pretty indestructible. And even with the furnishings, like it needs to meet certain requirements and like
Mm,
has to be built differently because it needs to last for at least 5 to 10 years. So
yeah.
everything has like a higher warranty than you would in a residential space because again, it's just more people using the space. And then I think too, yeah, we just kind of think about it. Too, as we're kind of designing the spaces, like everything is pretty flexible. So, a lot of these larger spaces, I mean, yes, like in a stadium, they might use it for whatever game of the sport it is, but then they might want to rent out that space for a different event or,
Mhm.
some kind of function. And so the furniture needs to be very flexible and be able to kind of move to whichever configuration they're wanting. So that's another key factor in like these kind of commercial spaces that we work on.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. So it's like using the space for the original space that was created, but, like, also having the transformation possible when needed to accommodate
Yeah.
other things. Yeah, wow, that's really interesting to think about, and I'm imagining that probably doesn't happen as much with maybe people's homes, right? Like, a transformation is in the same way, like, a
Yeah.
bedroom's probably a bedroom, we maybe stick a desk in there. Um, so I love that. So I wanna ask, like, for you kind of going back to you as, like, a kid or, like, a younger woman, how did you get into this career, and was it something that you were always interested in doing? Like, did you always have this sort of zest for, like, design, or how did you find out that it existed?
Yeah, I do feel very fortunate that at a very young age, I would say like as a kid, like I was very intrigued by design, like interior
Mhm.
design, and at the time it was more residential, right? Like
Sure.
HDTV was super popular when cable was popular.
Yeah.
I would like look at blogs and magazines and like I was just very intrigued by that. So I think at an early age, I just kind of knew that that was something that I might want to go into. And once I graduated from high school and I went to FITM in LA to study interior design, that's when I found out that you could do commercial. So they teach you
Okay.
both. They teach you residential and they teach you commercial. And that's when I was like, oh, I think I'd like the side of commercial way more. It sounded more interesting. It seemed like there was a bit more creativity involved to my knowledge. And so I kind of ended up going in that path.
That's awesome, and will you share what does FITM stand for those
Yeah,
who don't know?
yeah. So it's the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising.
Okay, awesome. I've heard of it, but I don't know more than the name. So I love that you shared that you learned both. And I think, when you decided to go that route of like learning more about the commercial side of things, what does that mean? Like, what does that entail? And, what were your next steps after school? Like, what was that kind of between, when you graduated to now having your own company, which is so amazing.
Yeah, so, um, I feel like I definitely had a very fortunate journey in the sense of like I mentioned, I had a residential thesis class and a commercial thesis class, which are kind of like your two last classes in interior design. And so for that commercial thesis class, it just happened that that professor that I had worked at the dream company that I wanted to work at, which is Gensler. It's like the biggest architecture and interior design firm in the world.
Wow.
And so I intentionally, worked really hard and showed off, and it paid off. And she offered me a internship in the hospitality studio of Gensler. So I interned there, and then I got hired right after that internship, and then I worked at Gensler for over 10 years, and then I decided to go off on my own. So I've been doing my own thing now for almost 5 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
and good for you, smart cookie, that you like knew that this was such an amazing opportunity and really grabbed it. I love that. And I think, I'm curious too, like what was it that, like if you could talk about the difference between the residential and the commercial, like in a nutshell, what is it that I guess attracts you to the commercial side? Like for those of us who are just like who have watched the HGTV or like have looked at the magazines, but are there certain things that like you're aware of in your space that, if we're walking into some place like, because I'm in Phoenix, so I might walk in to the stadium where the Diamondbacks play, the baseball team. And so it's like, what kinds of things are you thinking about in the design process that like we just would not maybe know about as just the everyday person walking in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I guess to kind of answer that was like a kind of a two-part question, but to answer that, I would say like it's really more about the journey that we're thinking about in these large scale projects. So like yes, we're designing multiple spaces within the venue. Like I mentioned, like it might be the lobby to the concourse to the concessions where you buy food to the different clubs. But it's really, even though you're designing those spaces like individually, like you still want to create this uh, continuity within the spaces so that people really feel like a flow when they're within the space. So it's like it feels like
Mm,
you're um, really getting a full experience in the venue versus like individual moments. So
yes.
everything is really curated, and obviously that is not just our job, but we work with other like the graphics team that that does the branding. We work with the lighting consultant. I work with the architect. Like obviously, they do kind of more the space planning, the structural engineer with the column placement, and all of that. And so there's so much that goes involved into that. But I think as a designer, we're really thinking about curating a journey for the end user.
Mm, I love that. And it's interesting, like, when you're working with all those people, um, how are you like, are you, constantly sort of in communication with all these people at once? Or like, who do you usually work with most often, I guess, to make decisions? Or do you get sort of like the go for it on the like on some of the smaller things or like the materials and they're like just create the vision? Or does it vary by project? Like, how does that part work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for sure for us, like we like to kind of bring the big vision of like what the concept is going to be in the beginning. Like first we start with the concept for the different spaces, and get that approved, and then we'll kind of work with the architect to kind of design it architecturally to really kind of
Mhm.
shape the space. Like we're kind of given a box, right? And so then we kind of work within that box, but we work with the architect to make sure, like if there's certain boundaries that we need to work off of and limitations. And so we kind of design it and then we'll get that approved and then obviously then start working with the other consultants to make sure that, there's no issues with if like we want to make sure what we're designing is realistic at the end of the day and not show something unrealistic to the client. So we will work with all the consultants very early on, but I would say the concept is really when we get that initial approval. And then once we design it, then like you said, the finishes, the way that it's laid out with the furniture and where the bar placement is, where the food beverage component is, like all that is really our responsibility.
Okay, wow. So it's almost like do you come in usually at like before the building is even built or like the room exists? So it's like you're at the very beginning of the process, the conception almost?
Yeah, there's two
Okay.
different scenarios, I guess. There's in these larger scale projects, you can like I tend to work more on new construction now.
Okay.
So I'm really working early on in the project versus there's renovation projects. So there's like
Mhm.
a lot of renovations that happen and it's an existing condition. So then you're kind of given, more regulations and you have to do it within a certain time zone.
Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. And then, I'm wondering if you could give us an example of just kind of like a project that you've worked through before, or, even if you're allowed, like if you're working on something now, to kind of like allow us to see how it actually progresses or like the things you're thinking about as you go through or the decisions you have to make.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything comes to mind.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I can talk about one project right now that
Okay.
it's public knowledge now, but it's the new Nissan Stadium in Nashville, Tennessee, so the new football stadium. And so, yeah, I've been working on that now almost 5 years. So it's going to
Wow.
be completed February 2027, which is pretty exciting. But
Yeah.
we worked on that since the very beginning. And so just, I guess, to talk about that journey, I mean, we worked on all the premium spaces. So like I mentioned, from the lobby spaces, we're really thinking about what is that VIP experience? Because from the lobby, you access all the different club spaces, all the different
Mm,
suite levels. Um, so we're really guiding the guests through that journey. And then for each different level, there's, like I mentioned, there's a different club, for example. So, that we really worked with the client for them to tell us if sometimes there's certain sponsors for certain clubs that, whether it's a liquor brand, maybe it's a car brand that, will come and sponsor it. So we might want to incorporate, their branding somehow. Nashville is big into like the music scene. So then some clubs
okay.
have the live music component. So we have to make sure we have the stage built in there. There's a lot, like some clubs are bigger, so they might have thousands of people. So it's just much bigger, and we have to really be strategic about having enough tables and seating for people because you want people to be able to eat and drink, and still be able to go to their seats. So a lot of times we have to make sure that the space we're given works, but sometimes it's too small. So we might have
Wow.
to say there we can't fit this amount of people because we still need this many more tables or square footage. So, that's just a little glimpse on that project.
Wow. Yeah, that is so cool. And that is amazing you've been working on it for that long. Wow. That is incredible. I'm curious too, like, is that the usual lifespan of a project? Like, are you involved oftentimes for that long, or is this one special? Like,
I would
what is
say
that like?
typically for new construction, yes. I mean, this
Mm,
is like an NFL stadium, so it's much bigger. So 5 years is pretty normal. I've worked on a couple like MLS stadiums, which is soccer, and those are much smaller. So that
okay.
could be, 2 to 3 years. Again, this is new construction, so it just depends. But if you're doing a renovation, that's a quicker turnaround because it's an existing stadium, so it might just be, a couple months to a year.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that is so cool. It's funny because I'm gonna think about like the next time that I go into a game, like that I'm gonna be looking around in such a different way, I feel like. Because
Yeah.
it's just something I think that I never thought about before. So I love that.
And I think
You know,
people have this like misunderstanding too about stadiums. I always tell people I'm a hospitality designer because when I say do stadiums, like I think they think it's like a sports bar and there's like the team colors everywhere. I'm like, we don't they don't care about the team colors. They're using these spaces for more non-game days for like other events. That's how they make the majority of their money. So they want these
Mhm.
spaces to feel as premium as possible versus making it like very casual with their team colors because there's only a certain amount of football games in a year versus whatever else they can rent it out for or concerts.
Yeah. Yeah, that is such an interesting point too. So I think like, kind of going back to your point that we talked about at the beginning where you're helping share like a story and like creating these emotions in people. How do you come to that? I'm imagining you're talking to the teams who are helping, like whether from marketing and branding, the people who are actually helping to pay for it and build it. But how do you kind of define like what that is like? And then how do you translate that into almost like a vibe? Like I don't know how else to say it, but like,
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah.
translate the story and the emotion for people to see and experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two components, I guess, if I were to phrase it. Like, one kind of comes from the client, which is they give us like tiers of spaces, so they kind of
Mm,
categorize them. So, like, tier one might be like your high end, like your most premium VIP experience, right? So that's like your suite holders and where the majority of the corporate companies might spend money. Then tier two might be, it's still a premium experience, but it might not be like as VIP. And then you have your tier three, which is like kind of more like your beer hall, like bit more like casual kind of bar experience. And so that, they kind of establish that first. And then it's really our responsibility to come up with like the concept. And typically what I like to do with these big venues is like utilize where it's located. So really,
mhm.
like for example, that Nashville, the Nissan Stadium, like I mean, Nashville is just such a major city now, and like I said, it has a huge music influence. So we really use the city as inspiration, and then within the different spaces, kind of find what's appropriate based on the user group that would be using that type of club space, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
that kind of helps categorize it a bit better.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I want to ask also, kind of transitioning to you starting your own business, like going from being part of what sounds like a humongous company, and then now having your own business that you've had for almost 5 years. Like, so congratulations, first of all, for that. I'm curious, like, I guess, how did you decide to, first of all, starting your own company, and then like if you can explain, like, what did that actually feel like? Like, did you decide I'm gonna hone in on this particular type of client, like, only? Like, did you know exactly what you wanted to do when you were making that decision, or what was that like?
Yeah, I definitely knew that I wanted to that sports and venues has just become my passion in terms of like project type. I've been doing that, I would say, for the past like 8 to 10 years. So I really enjoy that project type. So I knew I wanted to continue that path. I think I always tell people I kind of started my company accidentally. I mean, I've had people that are entrepreneurs in my life that have influenced me and always like created that spark. So I've always been curious about going off on my own because I truly do care about like creating the best work and giving the best work. Because you can draw a pretty picture, but really it's what it looks like at the end of the day because it's about following through. And I
Mhm.
really, saw that there was a little bit of a lack of that sometimes in some of the bigger companies. So for me now, we might not work on as many projects, but I know, for example, that the Nissan Stadium we worked on for almost 5 years, I know it's going to look exactly like what you've been seeing in the renderings and what the client expects because
Yeah.
we're holding their hand every single step of the way. Like even right now with furniture prototypes, like every single thing is like custom. And
Wow.
so yeah, I think for me, it's just it kind of happened when I left the company. I left the firm I was working at, and I had clients that still wanted me to stay on projects. So that's kind of
Mm,
the evolution of my company starting was
wow.
really kind of listening to the clients of like, why don't you stay on? And I basically started consulting and then eventually started to win my own projects. For example, the Nissan Stadium we worked on for almost 5 years, I know it's going to look exactly like what you've been seeing in the renderings and what the client expects because
Yeah.
we're holding their hand every single step of the way. Like even right now with furniture prototypes, like every single thing is like custom. And
Wow.
so yeah, I think for me, it's just it kind of happened when I left the company. I left the firm I was working at, and I had clients that still wanted me to stay on projects. So that's kind of
Mm,
the evolution of my company starting was
wow.
really kind of listening to the clients of like, why don't you stay on? And I basically started consulting and then eventually started to win my own projects.
That's amazing. And is that like a huge process of getting projects? I mean, because like I'm imagining something like a stadium. Is that like a bidding I know nothing about this world, so I'm asking this from a very naive place.
No, it's okay.
So like what is the process for that? Because it sounds like it sounds like a big process maybe.
I think, yeah, for each different project type, it can be. I think obviously stadiums are big, so typically it's a competitive process, meaning like if it's a new construction, there's a competition that happens, where
Okay.
usually like six different firms compete and basically show different designs and then
Mhm.
somebody gets selected. Usually that's more for like the larger scale architecture component of it. And so my strategy has been to really collaborate with different architects that don't have interiors in-house, and that's been working successfully. But then at the same time, I just from over the years, I have really good relationship with the teams and people, it's a small industry. Like people move around. And so if you have a great reputation, your name comes up. So I think just like everything, it's really being really good at what you do and creating that good reputation.
Yeah, that's so cool. That is really interesting. And so what are the other types of things that like you've worked on over the years, whether with your own company or even back when you were with Gensler and what like do you have any sort of favorite things that stood out to you over the years or like unique things? Yeah, I'd love to hear some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I did mention in the beginning I kind of worked more in the hospitality side, so that was more I worked on like international five-star hotels like in
Mm,
Asia, and so that obviously that was like such a great experience because it was really when I got exposed to like my first time to like large scale projects, so that obviously is um one of the key memories that I have. And to me, it's like from that, it's like going into sports venues, they're very similar in terms of the type
mm,
of spaces that you have. The scale of spaces, like your suites are kind of like guest rooms, and your clubs are kind of like restaurants, right? And you have lobbies in both. So, like, a lot of it is very similar. So, that's a great memory. And then I think, too, it was just such a large firm that I think there was just so many great resources available
mm.
because there was studios for every type of project type you can imagine for, workplace to movie theaters to mixed use. So I think having such a range of friends in the industry, like it's just really opened my mind and exposed me to different designs that I wouldn't have thought of. So I always tell people it's great to work for a big firm because you want that exposure and take advantage of it as much as you can.
Yeah. That is a great That is great advice. And so I guess like I would love to kind of segue into, if there are women or like young women listening to this and they're like, this sounds so cool. I would have never thought about this sort of option as part of the interior design industry. Is there anything that you would talk about as far as places where they could start, connecting with people or looking at resources or understanding the industry better and like in this particular lane where you could kind of say like I would get started here, like reach out to these types of people. Just any suggestions like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that there's certain organizations that I think are super helpful for people who are curious about the industry, and even if they, like you said, might know nothing about it. There's one called NEWH, which
Mm.
is all over the United States, and they have different um, chapters kind of throughout different major cities, but they basically act like a resource. So they have uh, events, and they have like educational workshops and things of that nature. So I think, that that's a network that like is very open to anybody who might be curious. I know you mentioned before not, I personally like just saw that there was a big gap in the industry, people not knowing that this was a career path. So
Yeah.
I did create a digital course for that. So that is another avenue. But again, that was just because I just always meet people and they're like, that sounds like such a cool job. How can I get started? And it's like, how can I put 15 years of experience in, just a limited amount of time and make you gain all the knowledge I had. It's like it kind of like a shortcut to the industry, because
Yeah.
I feel like we always want to have that mentor. So, that was kind of my way of trying to give back to the industry. And then I think that there's also just trade shows that happen in the industry. There's one coming up here I live in Nevada, but there's one coming up in beginning of May, which is called Hospitality Design Expo. And that is, again, just it's a giant trade show. It's really for people to come and exhibit. So you see different manufacturers from material vendors to furniture to lighting. A ton of people from the industry come. And so there's just always different events, and they have a great like speaker conference as well that happens alongside with it. So that's a great way to just get your foot in the door and like get that curiosity sparked a bit more.
I love that. I appreciate those resources. I wanted to ask really quick, what does the NEWH stand for if you happen to remember? Do you remember? If not, people can find it on their own.
I can tell
Um,
you.
um,
It's basically the network of executive women in hospitality.
I love it, and it's women, so even better. That's, like,
Yeah.
perfect for this
I mean,
audience. So,
they're
okay.
they're open to the different genders, but it started out that way, so then NEWH just kind of became that.
Yeah, I love that. That's so cool. And I'm curious, for you with, like, kind of where you are now, where you are designing these massive spaces, really cool projects. Like, I love that you're designing an entire stadium from, like, the ground up. That is so cool. Are there things that, like, you sort of I don't know, that, like, you live by as just someone doing your job that, like, you've just come to the learnings or, like, the conclusion, like, a mantra is, like, a well-used term, but, like, as someone who does this work that sort of guides you in all that you do, is there anything like that? Because it's such a unique job.
Yeah, definitely, I feel like just over the years, there's just, like, standards that not just like what you would typically want to have like in a suite. For example, like I just know like, okay, there needs to be this amount of linear square feet, right? In order
Mhm.
for it to feel comfortable. And this is the type of equipment that you might want. You want to have different type of like experiences and seating groups. So there's like definitely things like that for each type of category of space that I think has just come naturally. But I would also say just from experience, there's always lessons learned. I know people
Sure.
don't wanna, humble themselves sometimes, but that's just the reality. Like, every project gets better because you learned something from the last one. So I'm constantly improving what I did because I'm implementing things that I've learned and know can be improved.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that's like the best mindset too, because I know, like, because I teach workshops and adults, and I always say, like, I pretty much never teach anything the same way twice, even if it's technically the same, because it's like you learn stuff along the way, and you're like, oh, I'm going to change the timing, or I'm going to change, like how, like the delivery or whatever. And so for you, yeah, I'm imagining there maybe you'd be like changing the placement of something or changing a material or
Yeah, and
lighting or
honestly,
yeah.
every project, I mean, we're working on a new project right now that I can't speak about, but, like, every project I'm like, "How can I be more innovative?" Like, I want
Mm,
like, there's always a new stadium happening or new venues, but how can I make this, different from the last one, make it more uniquely of that city, of the culture that you're trying to create there. So that's always like something in the back of my mind. So I always like to challenge myself.
I love that. And so do you do projects all over the country?
Currently, it's been all over the US. So
Okay.
yeah, within the
Awesome.
US. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love to your point about innovating. How, for you, like, what is the biggest way when you think of innovation? How do you feel like you innovate? Like, is it through, like, or I guess, what does that mean to you? Is it through materials? Is it through, like, how people move through a space? Is it related to a particular
Yeah,
aspect?
I think it's all of the above, definitely. I think like the layout wise, like when I say layout, like how, because at the end of the day, a lot of these spaces, if you think about it, it's a box, right? And it's like a suite is a perfect example. It's like a guest room. Like, how can you design a suite differently? Like, you're still working in a rectangle box. It's very challenging. So in that way, like the layout, the functionality, definitely materials is another one. So I'm like a big person, like I'm going to Milan next week because it's Milan Design Week. And so I have a couple factory tours with like tile manufacturers, and that's how I educate myself and I see the latest and greatest new technology. So that's the part of it as well.
I love that. How fun to be able to go to Milan Design Week. That sounds so fun. If nothing else, right? I'd be like, I'm going to be in this industry because I get to participate in that.
Yeah, yeah.
I love it. That is so cool. Very unexpected bonus, right? For like for being in the industry. I don't think I would have connected that, but I love it so much. So for you, like when you're doing this work, I'm curious, like how many people do you work with? Like how many people are part of your company and like what are their roles and what's sort of your role? I know you talked about innovation, I'm sure is like one, but like, how does that look? How does that work?
Yeah, so I would say we're, like I mentioned, we're more of a small boutique firm. Again, not trying to have too many projects at once to really like give the most attention and best outcome for each project. The team really varies depending on how large of a scale the project might be. Right now, we're a good team of 5 people. So there's different roles. Like I'm, more of the principal in charge. So I'm definitely more of like the client forward
Mhm.
person that's presenting, that has the client relationship. Definitely, the big idea person, but also really my job is really to mentor and help people grow. And then I do have, some senior designers, some intermediate designers. That's just like based on the years of experience. And then, more technical designers that are doing more of the documentation. So some people are focused more on design and some people want to focus more on the drawings and the technical aspect of it.
Wow. Is that this is a naive question of me, but is that like when CAD comes into play or whatever technology would be
Exactly.
used
Yeah,
now?
now I would feel like CAD, we still use it occasionally more for like studies, but now it's Revit, which is part of the same, it's part of Autodesk too, but it's like imagine CAD, but it's all being done in 3D.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, that's so interesting. I appreciate that kind of like explanation. And so how many projects do you work on at one time? And how do you manage, I guess, like the timing of everything, or like where things overlap?
Yeah.
And I'm imagining too that you'd have to go, especially because things are being like built from the ground up. I'm imagining that you have to go to the place that is being built at some point at least.
Yes, yes.
So how do you do all that? And like, yeah, how many projects do you manage at once usually?
Yeah, I would say we try to kind of keep it ideally 2 projects at a time is kind of
Okay.
the sweet spot for us. Occasionally, there might be a third, but, I think 2 feels like the right comfortable amount where I think a perfect example is like with the new Nissan stadium, that is in heavy construction right now. So, yes, we're traveling there to be on site and, like, check on the construction once interiors is, like, getting constructed more heavily, but being balanced because we have a new design project. So we're really like focused on the design and documentation for this new project. So it really allows us to have a good balance between both. And if the nice thing about being a boutique firm is if I need to hire more people, then I do that as well. But a lot of it has really come naturally from like word of mouth from the industry. So that's also been helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that is so interesting. And then for you kind of moving forward and also talking about like having more people know about what you do in general, because I know you do get questions about what is this, with this hospitality side of design. If people are listening and they're like, "Wow, I wanna figure out how to start," is this something that all ages of people can start? Do you feel like you need a specific degree to do this? Or, and do you have suggestions for, like, if someone's like, "I think this sounds like an amazing career," can they start later in life, not having this same background?
100%. I don't think that there's a wrong or right, like, approach to when to start. I think I honestly believe, like, design, if you feel this, like, innate feeling that you have this inner passion for it, that's your calling. Like, it doesn't matter
Mm.
when you do it in life. Half of my employees, they're all women, but first of all, but half of them, it's their second career. And they're older than
Wow.
me, and they are so fulfilled, because they're finally doing something that they're passionate about. So I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer. Sometimes I do think that coming from a different career path brings a different creativity, a different perspective, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that there's obviously some skills that might require learning, but I think like anything, like you're gonna have to learn it at some point or not, like learning the software.
Yeah. Yeah, in every industry, right? I mean, that would be the case.
Yeah.
Especially right, especially now, I feel like things are literally changing and, a month later and, like, there's all these crazy things happening. You're like,
Yeah.
"Wait,
Yeah,
it's
and
only been a month."
I think that, when I first started, like, now, like 16 years ago, like, I remember when I knew people getting in the industry, it was like, "Oh, what school did you graduate? Like, how many years of experience do you have your master?" Like, it was like what you had in your portfolio was so crucial. Not that it's not anymore, but I think less and less, especially in hospitality, it's really about the talent, right? So you can like being obviously a great creative person, but I think also to, I think how you represent yourself if you're I think being outspoken and being comfortable with yourself is great because you want to be able to present to the client in a very, confident way as well.
Yeah, and I'm curious, on that point, and especially because you have your own business, and I'm imagining like you work just especially because you're doing like new construction, that you're also working amongst a lot of men, and sort of like saying like we're gonna do this and not this, or like make sure this is hooked up in this way, or like furniture placement, things like that. So, with that being said, how have you, or has it been innate where you just feel like you naturally are able to kind of say like this is what I see and present, and like also be able to manage the project in a really confident way? Do you feel like that came over time and experience? Do you feel like that was something innate in
Yeah.
you? Or I'm curious about that.
I th you know, completely honest, I was not like that in the beginning. It definitely was
Mm,
something that I grew into my confidence over time, and even on a, like, professionally, but also personally. I think it's all a reflection of who you are, but I think the more exposure you have, the better. Even in my firm, like, what I try to do a lot is give people in my firm as many opportunities as they can. So keeping everything very transparent, like letting them, like, even if they're not presenting, like, listen in the meetings, because a lot of times I was not in those rooms early on, and so it took me longer to get to that point than I would have liked to. But it was definitely a journey, and I think now, I, like you were saying, like, I can definitely, um, be in this industry where it is very male heavy, and not just on the construction side, but, all of the team executives that I work with, it's all mostly men. It's usually
wow.
I'm the only woman in the room. Now you
Wow.
see more, like, I'm starting to see a shift in that, which is fantastic. But
Yay.
over the years, but definitely, like, you're the only woman, and, like, I think to some people that might, affect, your confidence, but over time you just I think the best advice I got early on was like, don't be nervous. I mean, you're presenting what you love to do at the end, so just sell what you just did. And I think that just took away, like, everything. I think sometimes we overthink it, and it's like, well, yeah, it's just coming naturally. Like, it should be effortless at that point.
I love that. And do you have any tips? If women are listening to this and like, yes, like I want to get to the point you're at where I can feel so confident, whether it's in a group of men, whether it's a mixed group of men and women, but basically being within a group or environment, which can be intimidating because you are sort of on the spot for something and you are sharing something that you worked really hard on, and
Mhm.
that you hope people will like want to adopt in whatever circumstance, whether it happens to be in this industry or otherwise. Do you have any advice or tips that you've learned along the way of like how you either present or like anything you do beforehand or just sort of how you set yourself up for success before, during, or even after?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a very, like, energy person. So, I definitely do think that having, like, a moment to yourself right before you step into the room is always healthy, right? Like, you know, I like I said, I'm not saying to not prep, but definitely, like, if there's certain facts or pointers that you need to know in the room, like, sometimes you have to know numbers, right? Like, how many people fit and the square foot and all that. Like, definitely prepare yourself so you sound like you did all your homework. So I think, like, doing that ahead of time, kind of prepping yourself beforehand so you're, kind of in a calm state of mind right before you step in, I think is always great. So you're like a little reset.
I love that. And I think that's such a great I think that's a really great idea that probably a lot of people just don't either think about or like maybe they forget about is just that idea of taking a minute for yourself to breathe, first of all, but to be present and be like, "Okay, like, calm your body. I've got this. I did my homework. I know what I'm talking about." And then that way to be able to walk in with a calm demeanor. So I love that idea, and it's actually reminding me of this moment I did so I've done a few live events for the podcast where I, like, bring, a speaker who has a really cool job in person, and then, like, I'll have a group of women, usually it's, like, a smaller group of women to be there and, just have, like, basically a live version of the podcast. And so my first time I did it, I had this really amazing woman, her name is Dr. Nika Guachi, and she actually is at the Center for ASU for, like, mindfulness, resilience, and there's something else, but she literally did that same thing before I was starting because, of course, I'm the one organizing it, I'm, like, running all around, and my energy was like, "Ah," like,
Yeah.
stressed and anxious, and she's like, "Okay, Julie, like, let's take a breath." And she was so good about it. And so I try now, and it was really nice because it was the first one. And so
Mhm.
when I did it again, I remembered, I was like, okay, I loved that. I want to to, even though it is like, you're doing a lot of things, it's like I want to take a moment to just ground myself and like breathe a little bit and right and settle into the moment. So I think that's such a beautiful idea that probably would benefit, I mean, all of us even more often doing that in other situations besides
Yeah,
like
I
sort
think
of
we
the big
often
ones.
get too in our head, and it's
Yeah,
like I think sometimes like I think we create our own like anxiety because of it, but you
for
can
sure.
calm it down. Like it's all possible.
Yeah, yeah, such a good tip. I love learning about your job. It was so fun. I want
Yeah.
to end with the last question I always ask to every guest, and it's just to understand better like what are some of the fun acronyms or abbreviations or things that people would not know outside of your industry and what you do. So, to end our conversation, will you please share a sentence that uses verbiage or jargon from your field and then translate it so it's understandable to us?
Okay, so I mean, I think we kind of like it's going full circle. Basically, I feel like something that we'll commonly say, and this is just during presentation or as you're talking to your client, like we'll say, "Oh, we're designing the guest journey through the space," or what we'll talk about again, like what is that journey that we're trying to create, and the way I would describe that is that we're really thinking about how someone really feels the moment that they walk in and how the layout will guide them from the materials to the lighting to the furniture, how that all really comes together. Because naturally, we want people to kind of pause and really kind of like enjoy themselves in the space. So, really, all of those decisions really shape that overall experience as soon as they walk in.
I love that. Yeah, that is a really cool answer. And especially in the spaces that you're designing, because it is like, as you say, like people walk in and then you're right, like you're walking for a little bit somewhere. So that's really fun to think about. And so if people want to find you, Edith, like where can they reach out to you? Where can they find your business or like if you're on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so you can go on our website, which is epatelier.com. We also have Instagram, which is ep_atelier_design. And we are also on LinkedIn under EP Atelier. So hopefully that's all easy to find. And yeah, always feel free to reach out. Again, I'm happy to be a resource to anybody that's interested.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Well, it was so much fun to learn about you and your cool job. Thank you for being here, Edith.
Yeah, thank you. And I really enjoyed it. So thank you for having me as a guest. It was such a fun experience.
Awesome. It was a pleasure. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to Women with Cool Jobs. I'll be releasing a new episode every 2 weeks, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you loved the show, please give me a 5-star rating. Also, it would mean so much if you shared this episode with someone you think who would love it or would find it inspirational. And lastly, do you have ideas for future shows or do you know any rock star women with cool jobs? I would love to hear from you. You can email me at julie@womenwithcooljobs.com or you can find me on Instagram at womencooljobs. Again, that's Women Cool Jobs. Thank you so much for listening and have an incredible day.